Good morning, Dan.
Morning, Jonah.
It's wonderful to see you on this platform and have you with us. It's a real gift that you're willing to do this with us.
Thank you. It's a little disorienting, usually because when you're in this box, I'm like, okay, what am I keeping track of here? So
Right.
it's the real you, not just the not just the recording.
Not just the recording, trying to figure out which snippets to put on YouTube.
That's right.
Good. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of The Light in Everything, where two priests often, but now two hearts speak about the most important things. Try to find words to speak about Christ. And with me this morning on our roadside, is that what we call it? Roadside conversations.
Yep, exactly.
I love that term because it also connects to the road to Emmaus in the gospel, where two humans speak together and they realize, Christ is there.
Who would have thought the whole
Who
time?
who would have thought the whole time? So may that be so in some way for this series. Yeah, and we will begin, as we always do, with just before I give a very brief introduction to Dan, because I'm hoping that you will reveal who you are to us. But we'll begin, as we always do, with the Gospel of John in chapter 8. And this version I am using is from the Jerusalem Bible. When Jesus spoke to the people again, he said, "I am the light of the world. Anyone who follows me will not be walking in the dark. He will have the light of life." Yeah, so Dan Mistak, a farmer, a teacher, or was a teacher at one point, maybe not.
Well, the teaching assistant. Yeah.
Teaching assistant, okay, maybe not but I really now really administratively supporting the Seminary of the Christian community. What is your official title, actually?
Outreach and admissions coordinator.
Outreach and admissions coordinator. Beautiful.
Cat herder. Yeah.
Cat herder. Shepherding our students, especially our distance learning students, very well.
And the
And I
director sometimes.
and the directors, very much so, shepherding us. And I know that I speak on behalf of Emma and Patrick that we are super grateful for your work. And I know also that individuals that listen to this podcast are also very grateful for the way that you have been able to write the introductions to the episodes. I've heard from multiple people that they really appreciate your capacity with the word. And I do too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You get lots of grist for the mill from you all. So thanks.
So, but anyway, that's just a tiny little measly introduction. I'd rather hear from you. Who is Dan? And I know that's a huge, broad question, but maybe you could put it in the context of just telling us a bit about your biography in the light, perhaps, of what really grasped your interest, the flame of interest. Hopefully, I want to hopefully lead up to you having your current relationship with Christ and with the Christian community. So in some way, let's take a little time just to hear your story in that light.
All right. Yeah. And, there's a lot of twists and turns along the way. I mean, it's kind of boring, but also boring twists and turns are still twists and turns.
Mhm.
So, you know, much of my story is also where I've been embedded at different times, in my life, and so a lot of my story often is about where I'm embedded. At the same time, a lot of the way that I've come to even understand myself and the world is to think about the things that I'm absorbing from the world around me, that often remain hidden, that I need to try and do a little excavation of. Um, so I guess it starts with I was born in in a small town,
A
and it does
long time ago.
go. It is getting longer and longer ago too, which is I'm enjoying actually. But it does make a difference because I was born in a town of 800 people in northeastern Ohio, and into a family of people who had a long line of belonging to different Congregationalist traditions, or even the Church of the Nazarene was the church that I was born into. For those who don't know what the Church of the Nazarene is, it's sort of like the church from Footloose. So no dancing, no cards, no movies. It came about in around 1919. So really about the same time that the Christian community was
Mhm.
starting to develop, but it came out of a time of the holiness movement, where it was like, okay, in order to try and aspire to be Christians, we have to eliminate everything that is bad or dark or could lead to sin. And those things are often, the things like no movies and things like that. So, but my dad was a steel worker and my mom worked at Burger King, and I just grew up in this like very, very, very blessed childhood where my life was spent outside or reading books to avoid mowing the lawn and things like that. Anything I could get out of doing outdoor work, which is, as my dad would say now, like, what are you doing? You live on a farm. You're doing all this stuff that I couldn't get you to do as a kid.
That's funny.
But that's just how I've really reoriented myself towards uh, um, a relationship to the lawn. I mean, I still don't mow the lawn, but that's because I'm trying to cultivate a lot of little friends there at the same time. But grew up very, very, very you know clear that the most important thing is a relationship to Christ. I mean, that was what it was about. And that also led to some challenges because I didn't know how to articulate even what that was or what that meant. And so I'd get the question of, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'd say, I want to be good to my neighbors. I want to do good work. And I want to be a Christian. Um, I didn't know what any of those things actually looked like in practice. So it was just sort of this amorphous aim. And you can't major when you go to college in being a good neighbor and things like that. But I went to a Nazarene undergrad, so I went to Trevecca Nazarene University in Nashville, Tennessee. My parents did not care if I went to college. They wanted me to just get a job and get to work, but I was a little nerd. I loved reading. I spent a lot of my high school years reading, C.S. Lewis, uh, my brain being shaped by the Inklings, which, of course had, an undercurrent of anthroposophy in there, as well, um, which is, again, a part of this excavation later in life where I realize all of these different little threads have been weaving together historically. So,
Did your
but
parent did your parents push back at all with university?
well, they said they're not spending anything on it.
Okay,
That,
okay.
if I'm going to college, then I need to have it paid for myself. And I didn't want to go to, and I would not probably I have no regrets for anything I've done. I'm really grateful for how my path has journeyed, but I had this really stubborn insistence, because, again, kind of growing up in this very kind of rigid Nazarene world, that I don't want to go to a state university. I want to go to a Christian university. It's really important to me to be around Christian instructors and all of that. Um, And so I ended up getting full tuition scholarship to go to Trevecca Nazarene University in Nashville, Tennessee. And it was a culture shock in a few ways. I have a lot of culture shocks in my life. But it was a pretty big shock, and I went there to major in biology because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I loved plants, I loved animals, and I wanted to be able to spend more time learning about them. Uh, and so, went to Trevecca, was immediately like, I mean, I was like a kid in a candy store because I could take classes that I wanted. I could learn things that I wanted to, and ended up ultimately by the end majoring in biology and chemistry and then getting a minor in mathematics because
Whoa.
I almost I tried to also get a minor in physics and they're like, you cannot do another one. You know, this is just not going to work. So, uh, and I still had no idea what I was doing. But at this time, so for my Christian development, you know, I had really um my first year of undergrad, I was in was when 9/11 happened, you know, so long ago, which, you know, there's a lot of college graduates who have no idea what that pre 9/11 world was. But it was I just remember the change that happened at that time, and it was really shaking to my faith in some way that I've never had to articulate some of this before. So
Good.
yeah.
That's exciting.
And it's because I had a professor there who was from Iran, and I don't actually know, what his religion was, but post 9/11, the way he was treated at a Christian university by students and by others, and how his life was fundamentally changed because this country that we just happened to be born into was now at war with these people who looked like that. And, um And it really made me do a lot of reflection of like, well, what is Christ calling us to? How do we respond to global evil? And how do we, and I'm not, you know, and there's global evil is
It's a loaded term, yeah.
a loaded term, right? And you know, and that there, and that, you know,
Yeah,
right. And so it was quite interesting at that moment to realize is that, you know, in the name of being Christian, you can do a lot of terrible things to the human beings in our lives around us. Um, and a sort of reflexivity that says our team is Christian, their team is not Christian, uh, and and that can really open up doors for a lot of terrible things to happen to other human beings. Um, And so that was really kind of, a real shock.
but it sounds like also an awakening of a kind of flame that you mentioned already in the beginning. Can I major in loving my neighbor?
Right. Right.
So it feels like almost a kind of hidden thread of education that you're beginning on. How do we
Absolutely.
actually love other human beings?
Right. Right. And at the same time too, I was taking, uh, world civilizations course for the first time, you know, and not sort of the stuff in high school that you're like, you know, just kind of big blocks of time that you're like, and then finally the United States was the outcome of all of these things, you know.
Da-da-da.
The pinnacle of history is here, you know, and and I remember too very distinctly to myself saying, what does it mean to really take seriously the idea that God is love? That that love itself is God and vice versa, that there is an identity between these two things. And also at this time, I remember that there were floods that were happening in Pakistan or somewhere that was happening at that time, right? And this mother who was not Christian, again, uh, giving her life, like throwing herself into floodwaters to rescue her child, you know, and saying to myself, if like that is a clear expression of love, and if God is not existing in that, then what can I articulate about what it means for God to be love? if they're not participating in the life of God at this process here, then what I'm trying to say or understand about love is pretty hollow. And so it really just started like blowing my mind from this like really kind of narrow idea of like to be Christian is to pray this prayer, is to, you know, not play cards. Uh really
Yeah,
into like what does it mean to like live in love and what does that look like and what does it look like when you don't have the words that I happen to the magic words that I've been told were the magic words in a town of 800 people in Ohio, that I just kind of was lucky enough to be born into at that moment. And so those sorts of things were really, yeah, were really challenging a lot of my assumptions of what the practice of Christianity looked like too.
beautiful. So your also your conception of God was kind of breaking open, cracking, um, the magic words you referred to, probably something like, "I accept Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior." Eh
Right.
yeah,
Right.
and that you could say, like, the conceptual belief system was starting to separate from a reality of love that you say, "Well, these people don't say those magic words, and yet they're loving, and God's love, so how does that make sense?"
Yeah. And it did it. I mean, I couldn't, I had such a challenge. And also at the same time, Trevecca was embedded in southwest of Nashville,
Yeah.
Tennessee, which also, but so if I was driving from the university to downtown Nashville, I drove through the JC Napier community, which was a housing project. And,
Hmm.
this was all seeds for later on in my life once I became an attorney and was doing this sort of work. But I'm driving from this bubble uh, in Nashville, Tennessee, through this example of, uh, I think, failures to try and support people with really unmet needs, attempts to do that, but just a real area of, um, there were no grocery stores around us. There was a major police presence all the time. I saw a woman at one point who was clearly in the midst of a mental health crisis be wrestled to the ground by police, and, um, just, these are not the kinds of responses that happen to people who would be in a more affluent suburb or something, so it was, these things were being impressed upon me, but I didn't understand any of that, again, as the son of a steel, like, I spent my life working at Burger King, I didn't have these, like, class distinctions and stuff yet in my mind and understanding the way that the state operates on populations of people yet, but those things, like seeds, sat in there until later on in life, um and also, I'd be totally remiss at this time, to not mention that I was having a personal crisis of faith, not just sort of these like conceptual crises of faith, because I so deeply wanted to have a personal relationship with Jesus, a personal, and I didn't know what that meant, but I thought, and through that process, was really interested in, well, what does the early church look like, right? Like, how did we go from what the early church looked like into where we are today, which is very, very different, with all these years of empire and power struggles and things to develop where we are. That in that process, I also, you know, ended up finding myself in a community of people who wanted to use that personal relationship as well as a means for them to gain power. So there's a lot of, well, God told me this about you, and what you need to do is this. And it really came to a head because at that time, um, I knew I was gay. I'd known I was gay my whole life, right? So, uh,
Really? Your whole life?
my whole life, yeah,
You knew
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, it's also interesting because growing up it was about the worst thing that you could be,
Right, I was gonna say, that's probably really hard there.
right? I remember distinctly as a kid, my mom wanting, we were listening to some Christian broadcasting, 103.3 WCRF in Northeastern Ohio. And my mom wanted to turn the radio off because they were talking about gay people and how, how bad they are, and my mom did not want sort of like what those people do to get into the house, just we gotta cut that off. So I knew it was like just about the worst possible thing. But I always had this optimism that, well, whatever this is, it's given to me as something to bear. It still had a really negative valence on it, and that God is going to rescue me from this. And once I'm rescued from this, then it's all going to be for God's glory, right? So it's like, okay, I can deal with this. I can like, keep that going on. Fell in love with my best friend. Whoops.
As one does, as one does.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the first person I ever told was him, and he was the first person that we ever told felt the same way, and, and we were going to be missionaries together. We were gonna be like Paul and Timothy is what we said. So that was our way of, like, seeing that we were gonna work on this. So I was gonna handle the plants, I was gonna handle tropical agriculture, and he was gonna do the preaching, right? And that was gonna be sort of the balance in this sort of very platonic gay relationship, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what
Uh,
do you mean you were gonna handle the plants? Oh,
so
because you were doing biology.
that's right, yeah. So I was
Yeah.
gonna we were gonna, this is again, apologies, yes, to I guess my older self of how I treated myself, but it was that the goal was that for me, mission work was like I had been moving away very clearly from this sort of like you've got to pray this prayer, you've got to do this. I started seeing Christianity as so much more, much broader than that. It's something we live in, and as a part of that, it's like helicoptering into some place and then getting them to pray a prayer or making them the Jesus film was really big at this time. I don't know if you remember that moment in
Dude, yeah, yeah.
so it's, show this movie and then
Right. You get all
yeah,
these converts and
that's right.
woohoo.
And then we're done.
Yeah.
But for me, it was like, well, how do I like if we're going to be missionaries, it's like it's actually how do you support a people in a way like also a lot of arrogance, right? Like I'm gonna helicopter in with, oh, you've got to plant this plant and that plant, and then we can feed ourselves. So really going up from like kind of this Maslow's hierarchy of need way of thinking about.
Okay, I
So
get
I
it.
was going
Okay.
to try and do that. But we were in this group together, right? So this was and we were told separately, pulled apart separately, and, both of us were told that we were to marry particular women that they knew, how many children we were going to have, what this was going to look like, and, uh, I could not I said, "This is just so not any like, if God wants to tell me this stuff, my phone line's open, my phone number is here, reach on out, if there's some sort of divine vision, then I the doors are open, provide it for me. But instead, I was like, this is really dangerous, and this is not, and it wasn't like trying to even say no. It's like I know. It's like I know that this is not how God wants to relate to me is through someone else telling me these sorts of things. And so that was really the moment where kind of my a collapse of sort of this like God who is a being that wants to talk audibly to you and those sorts of things that I was really desiring and hoping for just collapsed, which was a really dark time. It was really incredibly challenging. I I said to those people, I said, I actually can't participate in this anymore. Like, this is actually really dangerous. I was berated on the phone. I was told that if I walk away, I'll never experience God again. All of the sorts of really, really dangerous things that people can say to try and exert power over someone. And I never talked to my friend again after that moment. I mean, it was a moment
Oh my
where I parted
goodness.
ways. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. But uh, it feels like a story now. It's been so long.
well, I mean, that's so I mean, I'm deeply moved by that. the pain that that must have been. Yeah, I just wonder, I mean, we talk a lot about a kind of holy wound on this podcast. Do you see in that pain, uh, purpose for your future? Can you say
Absolutely.
anything about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like the Tower Arcana, you know? It was I had built this idea of who God was, and because I was such a nerd, I built all of these, like, little blocks around it, like, "Okay, I've built this infrastructure of what God is and where God is gonna seat himself and how he's going to talk to me and what it means for the world and what my plans are for all of these sorts of things." But it was all very, very fragile. It wasn't real, it was aspirational. Wasn't, it wasn't it's so strange that at the same time that all these things were crumbling, it was also the same time that the foundation was being laid, hopefully not for another tower, but for a real field where things can grow and where things can live in. And that was sort of this understanding of love, this understanding of that I have to, if I'm taking seriously that God is love, that um, that is going to fundamentally reshape how I approach the world and what a relationship looks like. So um, that wound was absolutely necessary, um, because, uh and I don't wanna, like, be harsh on my old self, but it's like you everyone maybe everyone does this, but, you build up this this structure that you want to protect yourself, like, you have to, um, and and if you get too overly identified with that structure, you better hope that it gets struck, because otherwise it, becomes a fort, that then you can launch battles at other people from and becomes incredibly dangerous. And um, it still is, I'm still living in the post that after that world. But without that, it was the same reason why I never dated anyone, when I was in college or any of those things is because I didn't wanna reify these forms that and create hardness where I wanted there to be softness and tillable
Right.
ground. Um,
Right. Right. The fort of ideology that protects and attacks, but is ultimately fragile
yeah, yeah,
and is not actually our true identity.
no. And you can become a real barbarian, a real monster trying to defend that fort. Oh, and, I didn't want to. Just like I didn't wanna pretend that I could be in a relationship with a woman, and, like, have that, like, okay, and that is a lot of the ethos, okay, well, just, give it a shot. You know, that uh, but it was so dishonest. I didn't realize kind of how dishonest I was being with myself and kind of constructing this fortification, and, um and so I'm grateful, but those were very, very painful moments. I mean, I was parasuicidal, everything had fallen apart. It tied up with my s sexual identity, whatever that means, but just this conception of myself. I thought I had perfected the perfect way to be a good, gay, celibate, platonic Christian, And it's like, no, you don't know any of that actually. Uh, and that's, yeah. And so
Okay. Well, let me ask you, if you don't mind, just from that thread. So, if that was your protection and that was your tower and that crumbled in a necessary way, to, you said, because I wanted to keep soft, I wanted to keep my heart open. I wanted, I wanted the school of love your neighbor. It
yeah,
sounds like, um, you know, you don't just you can't just live in a vacuum. What came in to be your true protection? What came in to be your true boat? How did that evolve?
yeah. Well, that's a long I mean, that's a long path, right? I mean, it still is what's evolving there, but the initial response was to just run. So I applied to one graduate school as I didn't even know what graduate school was, by the way. I didn't even know what I mean, I was in such a state of like, I've just got to get away. I've just got to get away because I'm going to lose everyone. And at this point, I was like, I'm causing more pain by not being honest. I'm causing more for myself and for others. I can't have any real relationships with anyone. How could I have a real relationship with God if I can't even be honest with my friends? And I thought I'd lose all of them. So I applied to one graduate school that was as far as possible away in Washington State. Uh, I thought that I had applied to the plant pathology department. I got off the airplane in Pullman, Washington, which is just Eastern Washington, beautiful green rolling hills, land grant university. Walk up to the plant pathology people, and they're like, "You're not on our list." And I was like, "Well, somehow I got here. I don't know what's going on." And then somebody else was like, "Actually, Dan, you're on our list. You're in the School of Molecular Biosciences." And I was like, okay, here we go. All right. So I just like walked over, never told any of them that that's how out of touch with like what my even world was. Um, and so I was just trying to escape. But very quickly when I was in that program, so I was really, the response was, I'm just going to fill myself with knowledge. I have to understand more. I want to understand how the world works. And to like understand how the world works was to understand it at a molecular level, um, is what I thought, right? Very, very kind of Luciferic time in my life as a response to that. And so but I remember this time sitting there with one of the professors who ended up being on my master's dissertation committee. And he was like, the good thing, trying to be real professorial, the good thing about being in this program is you can finally get the real answers to the real questions in your life. He's like, and
Wow.
what are your real questions in life?
Whoa.
I just remember sitting there. This guy studies actin filaments, which is totally fascinating, right? How all these like different things inside of our cell move. I mean, it is absolutely fascinating. But I was just like, and I said this to him, I was like, none of my questions can be answered by, electron microscopy. None of the questions that really keep me up at night fit any of this. So anyway, like long story, 3 years short, where I'm like killing fish and studying. I'm trying to study my dissertation was on the sex determining region of the fathead minnow. So if
Whoa.
the audience is ever interested in out, I'm not going to give away the secrets of whether or not there's male or female heterogameity in the fathead minnow, but uh, I'll leave that to the listener. Uh,
What did your professor say when you said that, though?
I think I can't remember the like specific response to it at that point, but I mean, it couldn't have been, it couldn't have been, he eventually was on my dissertation committee. So, and he passed me. So he couldn't
Okay,
have
well,
been
that's
too,
good. That's
yeah.
good.
But it was a real, wake up moment for myself in all of this, because, if you're in graduate school and your big questions aren't things around xenoestrogens and the heterogameity of fathead minnows, then you're going to have a really hard time getting the energy to be causing a fish genocide a few times a week. And so I went from being in that PhD program to then also being stuck in the middle of, and I'm sorry, I am answering your question of like what filled that space, because
Yeah, yeah.
it was school. It was that I'm just going to learn more. It's knowledge that will save me. I've got to do these things. I still wanted to, like being a Christian, being good to my neighbor, understanding my relationship to Christ were all still really important, but I didn't understand how to get there.
So that's very interesting also that you didn't become an atheist.
No, no, come
Why
on.
not?
Yeah. Well, because
I mean, I became an atheist
yeah, yeah.
after my confirmation, apparently,
Well,
but
yeah,
anyway,
yeah. You know,
but
I
why not?
I
Yeah.
came to an agnosticism, where it was just like, I can't say what any of this means. Like, it would be equally evangelical to say that God doesn't exist
Mhm.
as to say that God does and he exists exactly like this. I'm like, to me, I didn't know what I like, and this was there's just something more to learn. I've just gotta figure this out. I've gotta crack this nut, which is why, I mean, that you, like, teed this up. When I had no idea what to do, I was finishing a master's. One of a professor of biochemistry was reading Kant, and I was like, "You can be a biochemist and read Kant?" And he's like, "Absolutely." So I audited a Kant seminar in my last, who's a, Prussian, philosopher who, fundamentally changed how like, he's one of the foundations of modern philosophy. Um and, yeah, was took a audited a Kant seminar, and I said, "Okay, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but philosophy is the way I need to explore exactly these questions of, like, who is God? How do we relate to him? How can we get there?" And I thought philosophy was the way to do that. Turns out that there's analytic philosophy and there's continental philosophy, and never the twain shall meet. And analytic philosophy is about, like, decomposing what the logical propositions within the word "the," uh, versus continental philosophy, which is, I find, to be much more rich and much more interesting. Uh, but anyway, long story short was, they'd say, "Hey, we'll pay for you to go to school, continue to go to school." And so I ended up getting into, a philosophy program, master's program, studying bioethics, and wrote my dissertation ultimately on Emmanuel Levinas, who was a, Lithuanian philosopher, and used him in order to try and articulate how judges make decisions around biomedical ethics issues.
Mm.
Uh,
Wow.
and in that process, realized that I have probably talked myself into going to law school.
There it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this was still, this sort of luciferic, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to, like, it's a kind of intellectual
Mhm.
question
Yep.
rather than ontological question, like a question of being, a question of what it actually means to be. Um, but at this point, getting older, I'm 27. I'm like, I need to do something. And my dissertation, right, right. And my dissertation was basically that, well, how judges make bioethical decisions is that they're in the space where they can and do make those decisions, and they make them. And there isn't necessarily a logic to them. And based on what they do, people die, or people don't have redress, or people do get redress and do get heard by a state that is killing them. Then, in particular, I was writing about a case called Abdullahi v. Pfizer, which again was, Western medicine, testing, I think it was a meningitis vaccine on children in, oh my goodness, and I can't even remember what country, but at this point, sorry, they were some African country, and led to children dying, birth defects, and the people were saying, "You can't come here and do this." And so they tried to have this case heard in a court, and a judge, on just a totally procedural issue that he had the judgment and the ability to make the decision on, said, "Nope, can't be tried here. Tried back in your home country," which of course is easily bought and paid for by a giant mega corporation. So I just realized I need to be the person who can be in places, who can make decisions, or who can, you know, put a rock in a stream and change the way the stream goes. I don't have to change the whole stream to a different direction, but I've got to throw some rocks so that as these bigger powers flow, they bump into things that move them.
Interesting. So your impulse for the love of your neighbor's school shattered in this in a form of an ideology that you had built up, but then you still kept the motor of knowledge is the way. That's the salvation is knowledge, which then transmuted into justice. I've got to find a way to work to love my neighbor through justice, and I'm not going to be able to change the whole thing, but I need to find a way to throw some distractions and rocks in the river.
Right. I mean yeah, that's exactly it. And honestly, I've reflected to friends, if I'm maybe caricaturizing it, was that all right, like I feel so disconnected from God. I feel that I don't have any sense that God is reaching out to me, and that, I'm at this point, it's like, oh, of course. It's like, this is in the life of Christ that all of this is happening. But I thought, then I'll be, you know, fine. I'll be real good to I'll do it. It's me. I'll be better. I'll be better than all that. And it's about having the right ethics and doing the right things and being pure. I mean, there's still all this holiness stuff kind of hanging out in the background of all of this. And it was, again, yeah, a real kind of dark, heavily intellectualized, Luciferic kind of way of like, I have to do the best. I have to be the best. And I'll make God embarrassed that he didn't reach out to me because I'm so good and doing so many good things. Yeah.
So interesting. There's an anthroposophical or Rudolf Steiner esoteric lesson that describes these two parts of our heart. One that says, I'm already it. I have it. I have the tower of answers. That's he describes that in that case as a luciferic. I have it. On the other hand, then the other voice in us says, I'm going to hammer through. I'm going to create it. If if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be me. Which he describes in that case as an Ahrimanic dynamic. But it's interesting that in your own way, your own words, you describe those two dynamics all in this relationship of, I thought you put it so interestingly, I actually want to have an experience of you.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
actually longing to just have a personal relationship with you, which would then help me also in my agnosticism, because then I would have something real to stand on.
right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that was it. It's just give me a crumb, and
Just
then that's all I need. Yeah. So,
beautiful. I just want to say one more thing. It just reminds me of another dear one in my life. My wife. I don't know if I probably have said this on some podcasts, but she's also an agnostic, and she's lived our whole relationship, 22 years of marriage, in that state. And I've never had the desire to change her in any way. But she's given her life to supporting me as a Christian community priest, which is also an interesting dynamic. But one time I asked her, I said, well, what would convince you? What would change your mind into more of someone with faith? And she just said, well, I'd need to have my own personal experience. I'd need to have something a crumb that I could base my own personal relationship on. So it's an interesting parallel.
yeah. And I think, you know, even though it would be great to be transported to the seventh heaven or whatever, I look around and I'm like, I've got so much more than crumbs. I
Hey,
it's in all of this, and not to be a little trite, but you remember the footsteps thing where, you're walking along at
yes.
the beach. Well, in these terrible times, in normal times, there's two sets of footprints. And then at the hard times, there's only one set of footprints. Um, where were you at those times? God is like, well, I was carrying you at that point.
Oh,
But yeah. But it is, I just have come later in my life, and in particular through just being able to also through the Christian community to orient myself towards this way of understanding and experiencing my own life, is to see how fully sustained it was in the life of Christ this entire time. And
mm.
that, uh, there was a buffet all around, and I'm begging for crumbs while I'm also eating at this buffet. I'm like, have been so richly sustained by accidents of history that have just brought me closer and closer, and even the challenges it's been. uh, yeah, a real joy to be able to come around to being able to articulate these things in that way too.
That's so fascinating, if I can ask you about that, or to go into a little more detail. Paul describes that in chapter 5 of Romans that, I think it's Romans, that grace is all around us, and yet we can be blind to it. And so that, I mean, you said through the Christian community, you've had help, you could say opening your eyes to the crumbs everywhere.
Bigger than crumbs, yeah.
But what's the detail of what was it that helped you start to see the things that were all around you, you just were blind to?
It needed to be another tower moment, but this
Okay.
one was a little bit less violent, than the first one around, you know, so yeah, so, to kind of fast forward maybe to that moment, I, um, had spent a decade working in jails across the country, but also working with policymakers. You know, I unfortunately wasn't working with the human beings inside of the jails, which I like am deeply motivated to, and am trying in this stage of my life to move towards how do I do direct service and work on
Oh,
that. Yeah,
yeah.
we can talk about that.
Okay, I got some ideas.
But and I had some like real success in smashing together the giant healthcare bureaucracy against the criminal justice bureaucracy in order to try and open up a little light to shine into these institutions where we by design don't let any light shine in. Jails and prisons are places where we hide people from our view because of our social failings, our political failings, our failings as human beings with one another. And many times the responses are, "Oh, get this off the streets, get this away from us. We don't want to see it, and they're bad people, and we don't want to be there." And I don't have that orientation at all, you know, not at all, because I know, not just from the data, but from my own personal life, people who I know who have been incarcerated. It's a lot of people with unmet needs, unmet mental health needs, and so it's hard work though. It's really challenging work because I'm constantly masking myself, right? I've got to figure out how do I communicate to sheriffs and how do I communicate to advocates to go towards the same things. Um, all of those times I'm being honest, but I'm also doing kind of narrative control, right? Because in policymaking, you can't be like, and here's everything that's going to happen, and this is all the ways I'm thinking about it. But it's like, this is how this benefits you, and this is how this benefits. That's very, very tiring because you are kind of an individual in that you work with a team, but you're always kind of keeping close to your chest, your own feelings, your own thoughts, because you don't want to alienate someone by saying that your real thoughts on how the criminal justice system works and what it means. And um, so I was taking a break from that, and I was doing direct service work in Hawaii. I had started what's called a medical legal partnership inside of a federally qualified health center. So I was doing direct services to people who were leaving incarceration, who were victims of crime, helping them with housing issues. They could actually just get on my get on a um, I was inside of the scheduler for the health clinic, so I was sort of like a provider in the clinic. It was the coolest. I loved it. I loved it. Yeah, it was the best. Um, but I was at this point where again was, just feeling incredibly drained. It is very draining to be an agnostic. It's very draining to be begging for crumbs while not eating the buffet around you. And I had really built this sort of like intellectual framework that was, again, it was absolutely a Gnosticism. And, and I remember I was sitting out, I couldn't sleep one night. It's like 3 a.m. So I was sitting out on the deck in Hawaii, all of the stars up above me. And I was listening to a podcast with a philosopher named Bernardo Kastrup, who was talking about analytic idealism, which is just sort of this. kind of deconstructing a lot of my, I had, regretfully settled into the fact that everything's physical, everything's sort of material, and that, that's just sort of how it is. And, okay, maybe there are some like philosophical problems with trying to describe how we get from here to there, but those things are a little bit too arcane for me. And I'm not even going to bother because, I'll just drive myself mad going through these different pathways to try and understand what all this. And there's also been a lot of tilling work that has been happening at this time through a different bunch of other continental philosophers like Heidegger, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who's a French phenomenologist. Uh, but sort of, I had decoupled from like, okay, I have this experience of the world, but I can't ever articulate anything. I can't articulate what any of this means really in a meaningful way. I can't. Ultimately, we're still kind of stuck inside of this like physical machine that we have no escape from. Very, but uh, but listening to that podcast where Bernardo Kastrup was talking about in very analytic terms, like here is the why physicalism cannot work, and the reasons why we want to deny that everything is essentially mind or spirit, or that everything is first and foremost spirit, and that kind of materiality is a subset of that. The physicalist approach is like everything's physical, and we have this weird kind of consciousness that we don't know how it works yet. It could be microtubules, it could be actin filaments, who knows what it is, but it's a physical process, which is very like constraining and immiserating, and also philosophically insufficient too.
Mm.
Um, that Kastrup was saying, no, there are very good reasons to understand that the world is mind first, and that we are constantly, everything that we're experiencing is through these mental constructs. And that was also probably about the same time that you all were on Connor Habib's podcast.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So sort of this,
Patrick and I.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sorry that this is also really kind of like a bit dry. I hope it's not too dry.
No, this is fascinating. Are you kidding me? Keep going.
And so just having that space opened up to be like, oh wow, reality fundamentally is something that I have built another tower around, that this is what it is. And I may not be happy of what this tower looks like, but you know what? It's like the whole world operates as though this is the tower that you have to live in. And you can get real far in that. You can be doing federal policy work inside of that tower. You're miserable when you're done with it, but you can live inside of that tower and nobody's gonna bother you. Well, that tower crumbled, and I was so happy to be under the stars, to see like, oh wow, I am this conscious experience that I have right now is beautiful, transcendent. This moment is transcendent. And that's when I started seeing the buffet all around me. It- And then, yeah, listening to you all talking to Connor, I was like, and there's a path in Christianity for this as well, to be able
Okay.
to understand the world in this way, and to dedicate my life to this and not feel disingenuous when I'm doing that, to not feel I'm lying to myself about it, was incredibly powerful. And that was the moment where I was, yeah, uh, I was kind of allergic to the podcast at the beginning. I'll be honest, right? Because I'm like, I am not going to go down this road again. I am not going to walk into all this like Christianity stuff again and need to say Christ and Jesus and all these things.
Right.
I just was so not interested in it,
Yeah.
but it didn't let me go.
It started to gnaw at you then.
I mean, not even,
Inter
it was like a thaw. It was what, not gnaw, thaw.
thaw.
It started to
Okay.
thaw. Yeah.
Yeah, the ice in your heart started to melt.
Right.
And rightly so, because you were it was such a wound. I mean, that was tremendously painful.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And and what you build in response to pain. I mean, this is why
Yeah.
how you have described the beast is so meaningful, because it's not this like,
Mm.
well, someday there's this person who's going to appear and he's gonna get, shot in the head, and then he's gonna which is what I was raised in, right? The whole Left Behind series and all of that sort of stuff. But instead it's like, no, this is happening now. It's
Yeah.
happening to you. It's happening inside of you. And how are you going to respond to these wounds?
Beautiful. So that just for our listeners, because that's very moving to me that's become internalized for you. But these two pictures of actually the self in the book of Revelation, one, the lamb or potentialities of the self, so to speak, the lamb and the beast, or the way that the wound in us can evolve is another way to put it. The lamb shows also a death wound, and the beast himself shows a death wound in the book of Revelation. But the lamb's death wound is something that inspires and leads to a self-offering love for the life of the world. And the beast's death wound closes up, hardens, or freezes. And so you identifying that beast quality in yourself, you said was deeply meaningful, but that led to a kind of melting where this, I mean, it almost seems like the doorway, and you say if that's true, the doorway to that melting was a kind of new sense of wonder, a sense that, oh, knowledge can be integrated in a good way to find deeper levels of reality. It doesn't just leave me empty.
Right.
Knowledge is part of the path. And then with the podcast, like, oh my gosh, there's actually Christians in the world
Yeah.
who are uniting the path of knowledge with the devotion to Christ, with reality.
Right. Yeah.
That was like, oh, okay.
And not just that, I think it might have been how Connor was describing the
Mm,
act of consecration in that conversation too. But to me, I mean, remembering back, so this is, little foggy. This is, 5 years ago now at this point. That the act of consecration is sort of that it's consecrating the human being.
uh-huh.
And kind of there's one human being. There's one capital H, capital B human being. Like, we all get to be human beings here, but there's one. And that, um, and so going back to my undergrad or my experiences even then, is that those people who were acting in love to save their children, of course they're in the life of Christ. Of course they're consecrated too. Of course they're being drawn up into whatever future we're all being drawn towards in this. And that their acts of love are building this human being. And I was like, this is what has always made sense to me. And I've now have been given these sort of tools to articulate it. So it
Mm.
wasn't through anthroposophy that I came to this. I mean, of course, Connor's like a little secret anthroposophy evangelist.
Yeah.
I'm sure if he ever heard us say that, he would lose his mind. But I mean, it's um, to be able to, yeah, to come to it from my honest and earnest, always desired to understand and care for the human beings around me. That is participation in the life of God. That is to be Christian. Um, yeah, was a real beautiful moment for me. So yeah.
It's beautiful. Yeah. So it's almost like the description of the school of what it really means to love your neighbor and how that can integrate into a deep Christianity. Let me put it that way. Yeah. There's a place in the consecration of the human being which you're starting to get more familiar with, but I know you're still hoping that the little affiliate and near in Akron
That's
can
right.
get started so that you can go more. Uh, but there's a part in in the celebration of the consecration that really, to me, speaks of this dual reality where there's striving Christians, striving in knowledge, striving in love, striving in devotion to become more and more truly human or more lamb-like, that have a conscious, named relationship with that. And then there are also, you could say, human beings, and I would even say true Christians also, but distinguished, that are acting out of love, real love, sacrificial love, like a Malala who stands up to the Taliban and sacrifices herself for the education rights of women. That's a phenomena arising in the human soul of sacrificial love. And yet her nominal, her ideological, her named path is Muslim. But to see that is also, there's also a Christian heart there, I think is one of the things that needs to grow stronger in what I would call deep Christianity. That we distinguish, yes, it's different than also having names, and there's differences there, but it doesn't mean that Christ is not also working in those souls.
Absolutely.
And that's a key to protect us from a kind of ideological violence that you described, where these are, you're bad and you're good and you're in and you're out. It's much more refined. But in the consecration, it says, now let's see if I can remember the words. It's always a hard one. um, May he be in us, he who makes hearts to be at peace, strengthens wills, unites human beings. So grant he unity to those who confess him. May he grant it to all who look towards him and would follow him. For me, may he grant unity, this love quality of connectedness, to those who confess him, is those who have, for many reasons, including pure grace, been able to find an actual nominal relationship. But it also says, and may he grant this unifying love to all who look toward him. And I see that as the Malala type. I'm looking toward love. I'm looking toward, who look toward and would follow him. Meaning, if the experience and the conceptuality were granted, would. It's like I see my wife. I mean, she's one of the most loving, selfless, devoted humans to compassion that I know. And she would follow him if she had the blessing of an experience. So anyway, that's just a place I think it's important to name, that it's a place in our consecration of the human being where we name those two levels of what you've lived and discovered out of your own life.
Yeah. Yeah. And um, the other side of it, right? I mean, because I think that there's a lot of terrible things that are done in the name of Christ, which is very wounding, right? And as Jesus says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven or something like that. And you know, I have a bit more of a universalist view of kind of things, but I
Yes.
think that it's very important too I always want to be very careful that I'm not saying Lord, Lord, and really besmirching the name of Christ. I mean, that's why I didn't want to call myself a Christian for a long time. but am very grateful that I can again and do again, um, because these opportunities have, yeah, revealed
That's
themselves to me.
well, I know we're coming. I'm very grateful that you had the courage to come on. It's just such a beautiful story, your life. And it's continuing. You're not old, but I just wanted to give you to also ask again in our, you know, last minutes here, if possible, can you tell us in some way, well, what are you on fire for today? What's the flame that you really want to live out and shine in the darkness of our world
Yeah,
today?
yeah. Well, I'm really burning for spring, but that's, almost
Yeah,
the longest.
a good farmer.
Winter, this is the most days of cold below 17 degrees since, like, 1899 or something like that here, which is wild.
Similar here. Yeah, amazing.
But what has brought me back to Ohio, what has brought me in connection to the land is how do I relate to everything around me? And this is the first time I'm articulating it this way, so apologies upon reflection. I'm like, "Wait a second, that's heretical in many ways." Uh,
No,
but to be able to, I've been fighting these big policy things that we didn't even, like, thankfully did not dive into because it's interesting stuff to me, but it is a it is a violence. It is a kind of, I don't like how they're thinking about it. I want it to be thought like me, right? Kind of a there's multiple layers to it. But what I want is to be good to my neighbors, to be a
mm,
Christian, to show up for people who need me to show up for them. And I couldn't do that when I'm flying around the country, when I have no real control over my calendar because I have to show up when people want me and need me to show up, which meant I couldn't show up to my neighbors when I needed to show up. So this is why I bought this farm, 10 acres, not far from where I grew up, which was not the plan, but it just so happened many, many interesting things lined up. And I am just here living in the rhythms of the seasons, not in the rhythms of the grant cycles, but in the rhythms of the needs that show up for myself, for my community, for my animals, um, and to understand how that impacts my being and how I can still be open to those around me and what their needs are in a very real way that develops community, that develops really resilient systems that will allow us to face whatever our future looks like together. And so for me, what that is I'm doing this work with the seminary, which I love and I'm so grateful for because it's so enriching and at many levels, including that intellectual one, the one that is um, that's kind of hard to scratch in an authentic way. But it's also been an opportunity for me uh, to move away from grant cycles and to move towards saying, what are the actual needs of those around me? And how do all of these different pieces that I've picked up in my life actually serve those around me? So I kind of did ultimately major in being good to my neighbors, I hope.
I love
Yeah. The hard thing is it also means showing up for them. And with this cold, it's been, a lot of elderly neighbors checking in on and things like that. So, um, and really how does this change me? So it is just now, how do I continue to let soil be tilled, continue to let things grow in me that will produce fruits for those around me and in a very, very local way, um, that I haven't ever been able to focus on before. Uh, and how does even my learning and my own spiritual life produce fruits for others too? That this is not something that's for me. This is again, a lot of this was like, well, how do I make this make sense for me? But now it's like, how do I let what is happening to me produce fruit for others? And it's quite literal sometimes, giving raspberries,
it.
giving
Yeah.
grapes to folks.
The
But it's
harvest.
also, trying to maintain that softness and relationship towards others where I can show up for them. And I'm grateful that that the Christian community and the seminary is a part of that as well.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dan. I was very moved by our conversation.
Thank you, Jonah. I really appreciate it.
All right. Blessings. And we'll see who's next in the Roadside Conversations.
Looking forward to it.
Bye bye.
Bye, Jonah.